the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbarda. Welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Morning, Shannon.
So what is the intelligence community's assessment of Vladimir Putin and his future ambitions?
Well, I want to focus, first of all, on President Trump's goal and the reality that's on the ground. And that's the thing that seems to be getting lost in what we're seeing in President Zelensky's statements in the White House and the European leaders' response to this. President Trump recognizes the urgent need to end this war after 3 long, bloody years and has proven that he is the only person that can do this. President Zelensky has different aims in mind. He has said that he wants to end this war, but he will only accept an end, apparently, that leads to what he views as Ukraine's victory, even if it comes at an incredibly high cost of potentially World War III or even a nuclear war. President Trump is committed to peace and to freedom. We're seeing this big divergence here between his position and his commitment to these values and the interests of the American people and the interests of President Zelensky and these European leaders. This is an issue that has to be resolved. I know President Trump is committed to doing this, and that's really where the next step needs to lead.
Yeah, so what is that next step? Because one of the criticisms of the Biden administration is that they hadn't talked to Putin for years. President Trump is doing that. He's having that conversation. But now it seems the relationship with Zelensky is broken, at least temporarily. How does that get back on track? Because he's got to be part of the conversation as well.
Of course, and President Trump has made very clear that in his previous conversations with both Putin and Zelensky that he wants to engage with both. He wants to engage in honest and real negotiations. And unfortunately, what happened in the White House after close to an hour of conversation when President Zelensky directly challenged President Trump and Vice President Vance in front of the media and the American people, he really showed his lack of interest in any real good faith negotiations. I can tell you there were a lot of conversations that were happening through different emissaries, both for Zelensky and for President Trump, leading up to his visit there to the Oval Office. And President Zelensky's immediate escalation there was frankly quite a surprise. This has created a huge rift in the relationship. President Zelensky, as you pointed out in the clips that you played, doesn't believe that he did anything wrong and that there was no issue with what he brought up in the Oval Office with President Trump. There's going to have to be a rebuilding of any kind of interest in good faith negotiations, I think, before President Trump is going to be willing to re-engage on this.
One of the things that might have gotten lost in the shuffle as people were trying to listen and now they're talking over each other, we've all seen the clips there from the Oval Office. Zelensky was saying, we did have ceasefires. I have signed onto other agreements, and yet Putin crossed those lines. He said he blew up the ceasefires. He killed my people. Does he not have a valid point that there should be real, understanding his frustrations and skepticism that Putin is actually going to be a reliable partner in whatever deal comes together?
Really, there's two viable paths here. One is that this war continues on as it has for over 3 years. More and more Ukrainians will lose their lives. More and more of the country of Ukraine will be decimated and destroyed in this, what will continue to be essentially a war of attrition. And to what end? To what outcome? President Trump sees this reality. So the alternative to this, which he is so intent on, which he talked about continuously throughout his campaign, that the American people voted for, is his commitment to ending this war and bringing about peace. That requires bringing interested parties to the table to conduct these negotiations. Of course, both sides are going to have their arguments and their interests that they are fighting for. This is the reality of how these negotiations always occur during times of war. Neither side is going to be happy, very likely, with the outcome, but ultimately it needs to lead to peace. And that's what President Trump is so committed to, because he recognizes that the longer this goes on, not only are more Ukrainians losing their lives, but it increases the potential of this escalation towards World War III that he warned against as he sat there with Zelensky, saying that he's gambling with World War III, and that's not a cost that President Trump is willing to accept.
Biggest driver of mass censorship in the last 5 years, it actually wasn't the Europeans. They were the victims of it in a lot of ways. It was coming from the Biden administration. This whole crazy left-wing idea that we're not allowed to debate ideas, that we're not allowed to discuss things, that we have to silence people, censor them, throw them in jail for silently praying outside of an abortion clinic. These ideas are going to destroy Western civilization. They're going to destroy Europe, and they would destroy the United States of America if we allowed them to fester. Thank God we have a president now who believes in free speech, but the danger is still there. The danger is there in Europe. The danger is there in the United States of America. We have to ask ourselves the questions as leaders. Are we willing to defend people even if we disagree with what they say? If you're not willing to do that, I don't think you're fit to lead Europe or the United States of America.
And as President Trump asked in his speech last night, how could anyone possibly be opposed to any of this action that he is taking? Well, apparently, the modern-day Democrat Party could. The behavior of Democrats last night was completely disgraceful and demonstrated how severely out of touch they are with the American public. It was the most shameful moment in the history of presidential addresses in that beautiful chamber. In what was supposed to be a unifying moment for our country, Democrat members of Congress instead screamed at the President of the United States, who was just overwhelmingly reelected by their constituents, walked out of the chamber, and worst of all, they disrespected the American people. Democrats didn't stand to keep men out of women's sports. They couldn't even clap for a girl who got her head smashed in by a man on a volleyball court. Democrats didn't stand for an innocent and beautiful child who is surviving brain cancer. They opposed eliminating taxes on tips and Social Security. They didn't stand in favor of cutting taxes for hardworking Americans. They couldn't even clap for two mothers whose daughters were killed by illegal aliens. One of the only things that could get Democrats off their feet last night was cheering for Ukraine, not for America. Last night was a very clarifying moment for our country. The Democrats exposed themselves as the party of insanity and hate, the party that wants to put America last. They've allowed their Trump derangement syndrome to stop them from celebrating America and our people, and we will not allow them to forget that. And it's not just the Democrat Party. The mainstream media still doesn't get it. Last night, MSNBC's Nicole Wallace disgustingly looped in a 13-year-old boy with brain cancer into an attack on the president over January 6th. And CNN's first chyron out of the speech called it divisive. President Trump wasn't divisive. The Democrats were. And CNN was proven wrong by their own viewers, 69% of whom, in a post-speech poll, said they had a positive reaction to the president's speech. It's sad and frankly pathetic that Democrats and liberals in the legacy media continue to allow their hatred for the president to override their love for our country. But nevertheless, the president will continue to unify this nation through policies that are grounded in common sense and that uplift all
Ladies
Americans.
and gentlemen, it is a great honor to welcome into the studio Professor Kishore Mahbubani. Kishore, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're looking so forward to this discussion.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Professor Mahbubani, I want to start off discussing the biggest geopolitical conflict that's in the world right now, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war. And I'm sure that we could have a very long discussion on what triggered this war. A lot of people saying it's NATO expansion, it's Putin. But you recently had a very interesting comment that said that the absence of pragmatism in European culture is a big factor. I'd like you to explain a little bit more about that.
Yes, I mean, the tragedy about the Ukraine war is that this war was eminently preventable. It was an accident that need not have happened. And the reason why it happened is because the Europeans have become geopolitically incompetent. And I say this with some confidence because the person who gave me this insight was Henry Kissinger. I had a one-on-one conversation with him about a year before he passed away in October 2022. And he was lamenting the fact that the European leaders are no longer thinking big picture, long term, and looking at the overall environment before arriving making political judgments. So, for example, I want to emphasize one fact so that there's no misunderstanding. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegal.
Correct.
Nothing can justify that invasion. That's very clear.
Right.
But at the same time, that invasion could have been prevented if the Europeans had shown any kind of geopolitical competence and acknowledged that since they have to live with Russia over the next 100, maybe 1,000 years,
Right.
maybe they should take into consideration Russia's security concerns, and especially if Russia feels threatened by some moves that they're making. And the Russians made it abundantly clear that the continuous eastwards expansion of NATO was endangering their security, and they gave all kinds of warning signs. And American scholars like John Mearsheimer and Jeff Sachs have actually provided a lot of data that shows that these warnings were very, very clear, and it's very puzzling that the European leaders chose to ignore these warnings and continue to push for the expansion of NATO. And I think, of course, right now, as you know, the Europeans are paying a very heavy price for their geopolitical incompetence, because the one lesson of history, and this goes back 2,000 years, never put all your geopolitical eggs in one basket. And the Europeans put all their geopolitical eggs in one basket called the United States of America, on the assumption that the United States of America would always, in one way or another, protect European interests, even by sacrificing American interests. That was an absurd geopolitical assumption, because all great powers will always put their interests first. So in a sense, whatever Donald Trump is doing now is behaving like a logical great power leader, whereas the Europeans have been behaving as incompetent leaders by not considering worst-case options when they enthusiastically supported the expansion of NATO.
Yeah, that's a very good insight there. So do you think with, Donald Trump's pivot now and really, changing 180 degrees from the previous administration, would you just say that is more him acting in the United States' best interest and like you said, acting like a superpower? So this has really come to be expected, this Donald Trump's move?
Well, unfortunately, you see, geopolitics is a very cruel business, and people who are naive and simplistic in their analysis of geopolitics always suffer. And yet, at the same time, some of the rules of geopolitics are also very clear. All great powers, including the United States, will always put its own interests first.
Right.
It will never sacrifice its interests for even the best of friends, including its European friends. And it was very naive for the Europeans to believe that the United States would always put European interests first in dealing with Russia. Why should the United States do that? The United States has got its own interests, and the United States is now trying to work out a new relationship with Russia. And this could have been anticipated some time ago. And so I think it's important for the Europeans to sit back and reflect and ask themselves, why were we so naive? Where did we go wrong? And what can we do to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again? In my article, I gave 3 specific suggestions for the Europeans. 1, consider withdrawing from NATO to send a signal that you're autonomous and independent. 2, work out a new grand strategic bargain with Russia. And 3, also consider working out a grand strategic bargain with China. So in a sense, act in your own interest and not in the interest of any other great power.
Absolutely. I love that. And at the article that you're referring to, we're going to put a link down in the description. It was an article published in Foreign Policy entitled "It's Time for Europe to Do the Unthinkable." And you hit on each one of those 3 points. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into those, though, because you say the first thing that Europe, one solution, right? You've given 3 practical solutions here for Europe. And I love the way that you framed that. They've made some mistakes. They've got to really think about their future because they were very naive geopolitically. So what would that look like if Europe were to leave NATO? And for example, your first suggestion, what would that actually look like?
Well, I think it would send a very clear signal that Europe is declaring its geopolitical independence. And hence, from now on, Europe will act as an autonomous strategic actor on the world stage, putting its own interests first, And as I even concede in the article, Europe may not necessarily have to pull out of NATO, but by just declaring that it is prepared to leave NATO, it is sending a signal that if you don't take my interests into consideration, why should I remain a member of this club? And the best way for Europe to be treated with respect is to declare that it is willing to leave NATO, because its insistence on staying on in NATO, even though the United States has completely set aside European interests, gives the impression that the Europeans, as I say in a somewhat cruel fashion, gives the impression that the Europeans are licking the boots that are kicking them. And that's very unwise, extremely unwise in geopolitics, because in geopolitics, you got to be equally cruel and canny and shrewd if you want to protect your interests. And the best way to do that is to declare that if European interests are not taken into consideration, Europe is prepared to leave
Professor,
NATO.
tell us about the second option. I think you bring a very interesting thing is actually what I like what you said earlier is that Europe, knowing that they're going to have to live next to Russia for the next 100 years or 1,000 years, is actually working closer with Russia, and I'd like you to expand upon that. I mean, we know before the war, for example, most of the natural gas that was going into Germany, obviously going through Nord Stream pipeline, that was a very, very key element to Germany's manufacturing prowess. I'd like you to expand upon the second point. Is it possible for Europe to actually move closer to Russia after this conflict and after what we've seen?
Definitely. See, in geopolitics, you must always put all options on the table, including, as I emphasize, the unthinkable options. And, people forget. I mean, this is why I wish the Europeans would study Southeast Asia for a bit longer. When the ASEAN was set up in 1967 in the Cold War as a pro-American organization, its creation was denounced by both Moscow and Beijing in 1967. And you know what? So one would assume that, okay, because of that, ASEAN will forever be caught in an antagonistic relationship with its neighbor China.
Right.
But the ASEAN countries are extremely pragmatic. They said, hey, we have to live with China for the next 1,000 years, and we got to make sure that we find ways or means of getting along in such a way that on issues that are important to us, we stand up with China, and yet on other issues that are important to China, we find ways and means of getting along with China. So, this is what pragmatism is all about. You adapt and adjust, and you negotiate a fair compromise, and then you have a good relationship for the long term. And I'm astonished that the Europeans didn't make any such effort at all to understand Russian concerns and to work towards building up the trust of the Russians with Europe. And this is an obvious thing that the Europeans should have been doing, because right now the United States is clearly the number one power in the world, no question whatsoever. One of the biggest lessons of history is that no one power remains the number one power forever. And 100 years from now, United States may not be the number one power, may not be the number two power, maybe the number three, number four power. If geopolitics is going to change, you must always keep your options open. But one thing that doesn't change are your neighbors. Your neighbors never go away. And a strong country like Russia, a resilient country like Russia, is not going to disappear anytime soon. So at the end of the day, the Europeans have to live with Russia over the next 1,000 years, and live with Russia even when the United States is no longer the great power. So why not work out your own autonomous arrangements with Russia, instead of saying, oh, when it comes to Russia, we'll just loyally follow whatever the United States does. And that's very unwise of the Europeans. And I say this as a friend of the Europeans. I'm trying to say, hey, take care of your interests first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both of these options are, fantastic and very, very insightful. I'd like to talk about the third one, because this one specifically involves China. And I think you bring up a very interesting point here. We see a tremendous amount of migrants, moving away from Africa, certainly going into Europe, and why? Because they're searching for a better life. They're wanting more opportunity. As we know, Africa has a tremendous amount of potential, but has not been as developed as it probably should have been. But there's an opportunity now, potentially to move closer to China. And I think we saw very interesting, the German trade minister had said that, for example, if they get caught in a tariff war with Donald Trump and the United States, you could potentially see Germany combating that by actually shifting closer to China. So I'd like you to talk about option 3, in the sense that Europe can actually move closer to China and what that would mean.
Well, I think, in one of the key points I emphasized about geopolitics is that you got to be very cold and calculating in trying to assess where your next big threat is going to come from. And in the case of Europe, the next big threat is not going to come from Russian tanks at all. It's going to come from the demographic explosion in Africa. I think here's one statistic that every European should know. In the year 1950, Europe's population was twice the size of Africa. Now, Africa's population is more than 2.5 times more than Europe. By 2100, Africa's population will probably be 10 times the population of the combined population of the European Union, 10 times. Wow. So if you have a lot of Africans, and unless you promote the growth and development of Africa, there'll be more and more Africans trying to cross the Mediterranean into Europe. So how do you prevent a major migration from Africa to Europe? I mean, assuming that you're not going to start killing people at your borders. So the only way to do that is to support the economic development of Africa and support any country which invests in Africa. Because every piece of investment in Africa is a gift to Africa and a gift to Europe at the same time. So if the Europeans were smart, they should welcome Chinese investment in Africa. But what I find quite shocking is that leaders like Elizabeth von der Leyen and Annalena Baerbock are sacrificing European interests by criticizing Chinese investments in Africa. Right. This goes against European interests. Why are you doing that? Actually, China is doing European Union a favor by investing in Africa. And the European Union, in fact, should be working with China to promote more Chinese investment in Africa rather than trying to oppose it, because the United States opposes it. So again, this is another example of geopolitical naivete on the part of the Europeans. So this is something that I hope that the Europeans will consider seriously. And I understand that the Spanish government, in addition to the German trade minister, the Spanish government has also come out to say that it's time for Europe to forge its own independent policy towards China.
This is the Illuminati. The Illuminati wants to rule the world, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. They've infiltrated virtually every level of society, and including the prosecutor's offices, the judgeships, industry, politics, Washington, D.C., the White House, and it's very serious. It's very serious. I'm afraid that it's so serious that we may have already lost our country.
The Secret Covenant. An illusion will be created so vast, so large that it escapes their perception. Those who see it will be thought of as insane. We will always stand above the relative field of their experience, for we know the secrets of the absolute.
China has identified the cause of the mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus.
There are fears a rapidly spreading virus has reached Australia.
This is a rapidly emerging situation where there is not a cause for alarm.
The first US case has been detected. There's confirmation the coronavirus has reached Australia.
China is urging its citizens not to travel abroad as it struggles to contain the virus.
We will be standing up Christmas Island as a quarantine area.
Foreign nationals coming from China are now banned from entering the country.
I have today declared that the coronavirus presents a public health emergency in the United States.
The death toll now has risen above that of the SARS outbreak 17 years ago.
We now have a name for the disease, COVID-19.
I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody.
The Italian government tonight put the entire country on lockdown.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
We will be suspending all travel from Europe.
From Italy this evening, it just gets worse. The death toll now worse than China.
What happened in Bondi was unacceptable.
12 years of perfect employment, it all blows up in 24 hours.
More than 3 billion people in almost 70 countries and territories have been asked to stay at home.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
We're asking everyone to work at home if possible, postpone unnecessary travel.
आज रात 12 बजे से संपूर्ण देश में.
So together, and with the rest of the world, we face this unprecedented challenge. For many, young and old, 2020 will be the toughest year of our lives.
We've got some breaking news to bring you, and it's to do with the Prince of Wales. He has tested positive for coronavirus.
The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has tested positive for coronavirus.
Countries around the world have now reported more than 1 million coronavirus cases.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been transferred to the intensive care unit.
The city may have to temporarily bury bodies on public land if they run out of morgue space.
Better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
We will work together always, and we will remain bound by blood and secrecy. Death will come to he who speaks. We will keep their lifespans short and their minds weak while pretending to do the opposite. We will use our knowledge of science and technology in subtle ways so they will never see what is happening. We will use soft metals, aging accelerators and sedatives in food and water, also in the air. They will be blanketed by poisons everywhere they turn. The soft metals will cause them to lose their minds. We will promise to find a cure from our many fronts, yet we will feed them more poison. The poisons will be absorbed through their skin and mouths. They will destroy their minds and reproductive systems. For all this, their children will be born dead, and we will conceal this information. They will see our products being used in films, and will grow accustomed to them, and will never know their true effect. When they give birth, we will inject poisons into the blood of their children and convince them that it's for their health. We will start early on, when their minds are young. We will target their children with what children love most, sweet things. When their teeth decay, we will fill them with metals that will kill their minds and steal their future. When their ability to learn has been affected, we will create medicines that will make them sicker and cause other diseases for which we will create yet more medicine. We will render them docile and weak, so they succumb to us and our power. They will grow depressed, slow and obese. And when they come to us for help, we will give them more poison. We will focus their attention towards money and material goods, so that they may never connect with their inner self. We will distract them with fornication, external pleasures, and games, so that they may never be one with the oneness of all. Their minds will belong to us, and they will do as we say. If they refuse, we shall find ways to implement mind-altering technology into their lives. We will use fear as our weapon. We will establish their governments and establish opposites within. We will own both sides. We will always hide our objective, but carry out our plan. They will perform the labor for us, and we shall prosper from their toil. Our families will never mix with theirs. Our blood must be pure, always, for it is the way. We will keep them separated from the oneness by dogma and religion. We will control all aspects of their lives. We will make them kill each other when it suits us, and tell them what to think and how. We will guide them kindly and gently, letting them think they are guiding themselves. We will incite animosity between them through our factions. When a light shall shine among them, we shall extinguish it by ridicule or death, whichever suits us best. We will make them rip each other's hearts out and kill their own children. We will accomplish this by using hate as our ally, anger as our friend. Hate will blind them totally, and never shall they see that from their conflicts we emerge as their rulers. They will be busy killing each other. They will bathe in their own blood and kill their neighbors for as long as we see fit. We will benefit greatly from this, for they will not see us, for they cannot see us. We will continue to prosper from their wars and their deaths. We shall repeat this over and over until our ultimate goal is accomplished. We will continue to make them live in fear and anger through images and sounds. We will use all the tools we have to accomplish this. The tools will be provided by their labor. We will make them hate themselves and their neighbors. This they must never know. We will always hide the divine truth from them, that we are all one. They must never know that colour is an illusion. They must always think that they are not equal. Drop by drop, we will advance our goal. We will take over their land, resources and wealth to exercise total control over them. We will trick them into accepting laws that will steal the little freedom that they have. We will establish a money system that will imprison them forever, keeping them and their children in debt. When they shall band together, we shall accuse them of crimes and present a different story to the world. Or we will own all the media. We will use our media to control the flow of information and their sentiment in our favour. When they shall rise up against us, we will crush them like insects, for they are less than that. They will be helpless to do anything, for they will have no weapons. They must never learn this truth, for they will turn against us. For their work, they will be rewarded with earthly things and great titles, but never will they become immortal and join us. Never will they receive the light and travel the stars. They will never reach the higher realms, for the killing of their own kind will prevent passage to the realm of enlightenment. This they will never know. The truth will be hidden in their face. It will be so close that they will not be able to focus on it until it's too late. Oh yes, so grand will the illusion of freedom be that they will never know that they are our slaves. When all is in place, the reality that we have created from them will own them. This reality will be their prison. They will live in self-delusion. When our goal is accomplished, a new era of domination will begin. Their minds will be bound by their beliefs, the beliefs we have established from time immemorial. But if ever they find out that they are equal, we shall perish. This they must never know. If they ever find out that together they can conquer us, they will take action. They must never, ever find out what we have done, for if they do, we shall have no place to run, for it will be easy to see who we are once the veil has fallen. Our actions will have revealed who we are, and they will hunt us down, and no person shall give us shelter.